All right, good afternoon. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We're maybe just a minute or two early, but I think this gives us the opportunity to get a little more extra talking time in. So I want to introduce you to who we are and give you a little perspective on the business and why we're here at the Hyperledger Conference. We are an automotive business, and that is the focus of our technology and the focus of our marketplace. And so when we talk about this today a little bit, we're going to introduce you to how and what all this involves with blockchain. It's myself, Jason Bennick, and Jim Mason is the director of our DMX Foundry, which is our blockchain and AI innovation lab. So just going to walk you through a little bit and tell you about who we are. So we are an innovation center, essentially, for the auto industry. We're trying to migrate a very long-term legacy industry that exists right now from the past to the present. My first question for every person in the room here is, have you ever purchased, leased, or financed a vehicle before? That's all I want to know. Raise your hands. If you've ever gotten a car. You ever done it through a car dealership? Okay, great. So who would say that that experience was probably less than optimum and could probably use a little bit of improvement? Okay, so we are focused on going behind the curtains to what we experience as consumers to innovate and change the process at the business level. It is a disaster right now in the car industry. Cars are great, a lot of innovation, a lot of technology, but the business process to transact those is in need of a bit of help. So we are an enterprise business mobility solutions platform for the auto industry. We provide a complete platform or a menu of services that can be turned on and turned off and activated by dealerships to manage movement of that vehicle asset. The vehicle asset is the most important commodity in the car industry, more than the dealerships themselves, more than the financing and the banking, more than anything. The asset is the most important commodity in the process. If it's misvalued, if it's mistransacted, it creates big situations. And plus, if the quality of the vehicle itself isn't up to par, it creates a lawsuit. So we are a marketplace for all stakeholders in the industry, car makers, dealerships, wholesalers, and our consumer solution comes out in late 2019. We're currently working with OEMs. We're contracted with Fiat Chrysler. We're in pre-contracting with Ford Motor Company right now. We have secured relationships with Audi, Volkswagen, Toyota, and Daimler Mercedes. So we're right now working through all the car makers to build out our solution as a conformed platform for enterprise to work through their dealerships. We're currently focused in the U.S. only at the moment, but we will be working out globally in very short order. And we're already in biz dev for a number of other continental areas because Toyota's biggest interest with us right now is actually Mexico. The industry, it's big. Believe it or not, only 14 conglomerates own every car brand in the world, and that's massive. The largest industry by volume is the U.S., it's a $3.2 trillion industry between lending, financing, trading, sales, parts, service, dealerships, everything. It's massive. And in the U.S. alone, there was over $880 billion in sales last year just on new and used vehicles and parts and service. But that dynamic is drastically changing right now. And what's drastically changing is the technology and the vehicles themselves and the connectivity to the users, as well as the process of what happens with that data. That is a big, big concern right now. So consumers are right now faced with a problem that we all know is privacy. You and I have the situation, and it's a problem. What happens with our data? I don't know if you realize right now, but every vehicle that you drive right now that's been built in the last 7.5 years, everything you do from your braking habits, your acceleration habits, your driving habits, how often you turn the car off and on, how long you leave it idle, all that information is completely tracked. Everything you do in your car is tracked from the moment you start the car and unlock it to the point you turn it off and disconnect the vehicle. All of it's tracked. That data is managed through Bosch and Continental AG, the largest data providers in the world for all the telemetry and telematics data that goes behind the dashboard, and they store all that information. So your data on your driving habits is being stored every single day. Now, what gets done with that data is very secure. It's being kept and it's being siloed. However, it's not being utilized, and that's where we come in. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But that brings about a situation. So we have this shift going on in consumer sentiment. People don't want to necessarily own cars for long periods as much as they used to. They don't want to have to go through financing processes and problems, and it's creating a problem for the car industry. And also in the U.S. alone, there's a big shift away from passenger cars to crossovers and SUVs. There's a 22% drop in passenger car sales, and there's an even bigger growth period right now in smaller light trucks. So what's happening with all this? Ford Motor Company is discontinuing making cars. I don't know if you know this. They're reducing all passenger line vehicles down to 2 vehicles. And those 2 vehicles have become their key critical items. They have trucks they're going to continue, but they're reducing it down to just the Ford Focus and the Ford Mustang. They're getting rid of everything else that's out there. Same thing is happening for General Motors. They're also reducing their car line as well. What's happening? Electric vehicles and autonomous. So that's moving in, and combustion vehicles are moving out. So passengers and consumers are going, what's going to happen with my data, and what's happening with the transportation? So we have trust, privacy, security, mobility, and transparency as the cornerstones of concern. The solution to actually solve this problem is create an ecosystem of blockchains across the global industry for automotive. What we see as the solution to this is providing an ecosystem using open source software such as Hyperledger Fabric to be able to create proprietary solutions that depend onto that and that are used through car makers and dealerships all the way out to consumers to bring you the benefit as a consumer of what happens with the technology as it's growing. Everything you do right now is on this device. You take pictures on it, you talk on it, you chat on it, you save data on it, you use your mobile apps. You should be able to buy a car on this within 15 minutes, and it should be transactable and secure, and everything you do in looking at a vehicle should be transparent and on your device. So the technology that we're building with VinBlock, which is the first solution that we're introducing to the industry, allows that to happen. So let's just jump right into that since time is short. Our first use case is an OEM dealer vendor consumer VIN blockchain. Now what this means in very simple terms is that we are creating a chain that exists for usage by everyone that has concern with a vehicle. You should be able to walk up to your vehicle, open the door, open an application, scan the VIN, and if you're buying that car, everything about that car should be available to you. Its past transaction history, how many people have owned it, what kind of service it's been through, what accidents, how it's been traded wholesale, how long it's been around through which different hands, and what's happened with that vehicle. If you can't get that information in transparency, the provenance of that vehicle is not provided to you and you can't see it and it's not available, it's a problem because it's really up to the salesperson selling you how truthful is their data. So we're trying to bypass that human factor and put the data structure in your hands as a user. Our first use case is going to be applying the VIN chain to wholesale. We have a business-to-business platform for wholesale trading, and all of that will be transparent in that process of transactions. And to tell you a little bit about what's going to be available in the VinBlock, I want Jim to bring you through and do a short demo of our first proof of concept in Fabric to show you how that's going to work.
Okay, thank you, Jason. So just looking at it with VinBlock as the initial, we'll talk about a little bit from a vehicle identification perspective. We're going to track basically the identity of the vehicle that has a life cycle. You create the vehicle, we become aware of it, either at the OEM level or through a dealership, through a sale, or eventually at our end of it. We'll pick it up from the consumer side as well if you have a sale. But at some point, we'll bring the vehicle into the VinBlock, we'll identify it, it'll become a vehicle, and then we'll start tracking against it. And as Jason said, we'll track lots of different types of operations throughout the life cycle of the vehicle, repair history, inspections, grading, all of that stuff. For the purposes of just ownership alone, I laid out a protocol initially that just says, let's track ownership. So you have a full ownership history of the vehicle on the blockchain. And then we also eventually retire a vehicle, right? It goes to salvage or whatever, and we track that as an event as well. So we'll look at all the events, track them through a basic cycle, and that's it. We also want the ability to query the vehicle, not only what the current status is, who owns it now, but we also want to be able to go back and say who owned it previously. So that said, let me take a quick look. Here's a brief, just a demo.
This is a simple VinBlock proof of concept for a potential blockchain at DMX. It's going to track vehicles by vehicle identification number, or VIN for short. So this whole little POC is based on the version Fabric version 1.3 samples, and we're running the basic network there. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at some of the things from the command line, some of the actions that are available in the POC. So I can say, let's first create a VIN. This would be quickly done at the manufacturer from my command line automatically, but here's a valid VIN number. We'll say this is a Chrysler 3000, color is white, and I'll be the owner of this. So you can see this is getting messages back, going out over the network, and it actually proposes the transaction to all the peers. They come back, the transaction proposal is good, and the status of the update or the write to the blockchain is now completed with status 200. So in theory, that all looks good. We can actually run a simple query on the VIN to validate that that did occur. You can see again from this transaction. We take a look at the results back. We get some brief stuff that says it's out there. Now let's try and actually we'll do a change VIN owner. So this would be as a result of typically a sale. In our case, on the DMX network. And so in this case, the new owner, make it my son, Scott Mason. And we can validate again that transaction proposal and that they're to the blockchain correctly. So it's written to the blockchain. It's also stored in the blockchain couch database. And if I flip over, we can remotely access that couch database like any other database. So here we can go out and say, okay, for that particular VIN, we can come back into couch, take a quick look, and see that that VIN is now out there. And it's been transferred over, of course, for 3000 and so on. So that's it. Thank you very much.
So that's it for the demo real quick, but the one thing I want to say is we did pick Fabric as the platform to start with, and the reason for that is that Fabric has a really fast expansion of, I'll call it, features and functionality compared to a lot of the other platforms we looked at, and we have multiple use cases, as Jason said, and we need to adapt by use case, whether or not we have public data, private data, off-chain, on-chain, and so on. And so for that, that's it as to why we picked Fabric, and I'll turn it back to Jason.
Great, thanks, Jim. So we feel that by being able to create an ecosystem of use case blockchains, that the data from dealership transactions, car maker transactions, and vendor transactions are going into this, then that chain or series of chains can be used and accessed in a permissioned environment that allows users to reach that information without having to go through a silo database and access it. So we address the issues of trust, privacy, security, mobility, and transparency, and we provide then an environment of users so insurance companies, marketers, and suppliers can access the same data so it's available. And that's our full presentation, and that is short as we could possibly make it. So any questions from anybody? Yes.
Do you also track geolocations?
Yes, we do. We track, we're actually, the transaction that occurs and where it occurs is being tracked at the same time the transaction is. So we parse that information as appended to the transaction itself, all the way down to the user who's registered, as well as the time of day, as well as everything else. So we capture all that, including the device you're on. Yes?
So what's your authorization model for example, in that example, to make sure that the person hitting the node is allowed to change the owner?
Good, that's a good question. So you talk authorization. In this case, it goes to also consensus to who has that authorization. So the way it works is that the chain itself is a proprietary content out of our business. But the business rules and what goes on the chain, we are originally devising. So as we grow stakeholders into the marketplace, like with multiple car makers, we have one now, which is Fiat Chrysler, Ford is another. As we start adding them, now we let the car makers decide what is the criteria for who should and shouldn't see information on the chain and what information should they see. So we end up creating entitlements and roles. And then once you become a permission user, we identify what type of user you are. If you're a third party, you're not part of Toyota, then you can or can't see certain information on the chain. If you're within Toyota, you can then see certain information in the chain. Within Toyota, if you're a field person versus a sales or a dealer, you can also see specific levels of that information. So you can go all all the way down to who has the most exposure to see a transaction on a sale of a Toyota vehicle, how much it was financed for, what they're paying, what their monthly payments are, what exact dealership sold that, what time of day, etc. But if you're outside of that, such as a marketing agency, all you'll see is that a Toyota vehicle was sold, which type. You don't see who bought it, but you get to see the region, and you don't get to see the monthly payments, but you can see how much was paid for it in the range. So it allows marketing to access the data, insurance companies to see it, as well as stakeholders across the dealership network. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, great. Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate you guys joining today. Any other questions, just shoot me a note. Thank you very much.
Thank you.